This is the Nomad Futurist podcast, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and transformation. Connect with us, share your thoughts with us at nomadfuturist.com. Let's get this started. Here are Phil and Nabeel.
Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is your co-host, Nabeel Mahmood from Kailua Kona, Hawaii.
This is your co-host, Philip Koblenz from Montclair, New Jersey.
And I'm Grant Kirkwood from north of San Francisco, California.
Well, I can only imagine what's north of San Francisco. I mean, that's probably got to be like a snooty Mill Valley or something.
Oh, no, much further north than that. It's less snooty and more woodsy. So I'm along the Russian River near the ocean. So it's redwoods and salmon and wine.
Wonderful. Well, that's the place to be. Grant, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Before we get started, could you share with our audience who is Grant Kirkwood and what do you do?
Well, the who's a complicated one, I guess. I'm still trying to figure that out, but I am an entrepreneur, very passionate about digital infrastructure and really specifically communications. Right now, I'm serving as the founder and CEO of Contrivian, which is a connectivity specialist service provider. But I've always been super interested in digital infrastructure, found my way into the internet kind of by accident as a young lad, and just became fascinated with it. These days, it's more kind of high-tech plumbing, but in those days, it was right on the bleeding edge of what was possible and just kind of fell in love with it.
Before there was a plumber, right? It was just rushing water, right? You had to find somebody to throw it into a little tube. So
String tin cans, water, rushing water, carrier pigeon.
Whatever it takes.
That's right.
Yeah. Let's step back in time for a bit. How did you find your passion about technology or how did you get influenced?
Well, so I had a grandfather growing up. He was an engineer for Parsons, and he was a chemical engineer, and he spent a lot of time on the very, very early computer systems that Parsons had, when the number of computers in the world were measured in the dozens, and they occupied entire rooms or buildings. He one time took me into the data center where this giant mainframe was, and he taught me how to do punch cards, and just found it super, super interesting. Didn't have a clue about how it all worked and why he was doing it, but he was a huge influence in my life. Really fell in love with science and astronomy and physics, and wasn't smart enough to do any of those things. So I defaulted to the last, which was computers. And that's kind of all I've done my whole life. He was a huge influence on me.
So if you were to just put that in perspective, what was that in the mid 90s, give or take, early 90s?
That would have been early 90s. Yeah. Late 80s, early 90s. Mm-hmm.
So did you pick up any subject matter when you went to school or college as a particular domain, or this just fell in naturally?
I actually did not go to college, and that was quite a controversial thing with my family. There were lots of educators in nature. I think at one point in the late 90s, I made the point shortly before the dot-com crash. I made the point to my parents, who were both school teachers, that I was already doing more interesting things than them. In hindsight, that was not the right thing to say, because shortly thereafter, the industry crashed, learned a lot of lessons along the way. But no, it was very much an evolution. Everything I've learned has been kind of running companies, working for companies, learning from people, no formal education at all. And like I said, that was not the plan. I thought I was going to go to college and be an astrophysicist, but just wasn't smart enough.
I think we talk so much on the podcast about the timing, right? And it sounds like when you came of age was kind of right when the commercialized version of the internet really launched. So if that's where your passion was, the unfortunate reality at the time, and to a certain extent it's true today, is that there really wasn't a subject matter that kind of covered it. I did go to college at a time also when the internet started, right around the time that I started my company. And I was a computer science major because that was like the closest thing. And it made no sense. Anybody that knows me, Grant, you know me, that computer science is not something that you would equate with my knowledge base. But it's one of those things where, because of the timing, it sounds like you were able to kind of pave your own way as a consequence of just kind of being at the maybe right place at the wrong time, or wrong place at the right time, or right place at the right time, depending on what side it is. But do you think that plays into it? Like if it was a different time, it was 10 years earlier, you probably would have gone to college, don't you think?
Even just 2 years earlier or 2 years later. Yeah, no, you're entirely right. That was a very special moment in time. I started my first business in 1996, probably about the same time as yours, right? And
Phil lost all of his hair.
Right. One of us did it right. Anybody that sees the video of this podcast will realize that one of us did it right.
I
You're wrong.
I stole Phil's hair.
Right. I've known Grant pretty close to all that time. He doesn't look like he's aged a day. I look like I've gone through like 17 presidential administrations. So
You,
yeah.
yeah, give yourself credit. You look seasoned.
Yeah, I look seasoned, like an aging steak.
Exactly. Dry aged. But yeah, no, you're right. It was entirely timing. So I'd gotten involved in a local bulletin board system. It was Commodore 64s on 300 baud dial-up modems, and so chatting with other people over this kind of electronic medium. I was like, wow, this is really cool. What's the farthest away person that I could talk to? So ended up volunteering in junior high school and then in high school at a local library because they had a 56K frame relay connection. Wow, that was just amazing. And you could,
That's blazing fast back then.
oh, it was, well, first of all, yes, blazing fast, but it got us onto the early internet and I could communicate with people in other countries. And that was kind of the spark of, wow, this is going to change the world.
That ride at Disney World or Disneyland, given what coast you're on, the small world was not, they weren't lying. It is a small world after all.
But they were not lying. And yeah, that became super fascinating. But you're right. It was that moment in time before the internet really had taken off, before kind of people knew what Netscape was, right? And we figured that all out all along the way. But you're right. 2 years earlier, 2 years later, I think it would have been very different.
But Grant, tell me about your family, siblings.
Yeah. So I've got a sister. She went to school for archaeology and both of my parents were school teachers, lots of educators in the extended family, educators and engineers and all kinds of interesting professions. But I would describe my family as somewhat collegiate in nature. So I'm a little bit of the black sheep in that sense, in that I didn't have formal education, but very intellectually thought-provoking family. We debate the hard stuff, and that's what we like to do. My grandfather, very famously around the holidays, we'd have kind of Christmas gifts, and he invariably would get books, but he had to be last because we knew once he opened the first book, we weren't going to see him the rest of the night. So that kind of describes my family in a nutshell.
So was this conversation over Christmas holiday or something that, guys, I've decided not to pursue education any further. I've picked up a field, I believe in it, and I'm going all in.
Well, I would say the younger version of myself wasn't quite as polite. And
I know more than you guys will ever know. Those that can't do teach.
That's exactly it. Yeah. But yes, there were conversations and they weren't necessarily the most pleasant. But no, my family's always been hugely supportive of what I've wanted to do and encouraged me to follow passions and dreams. And now all these decades later, they still have no clue what I'm doing, but they know that I enjoy it. So that's good.
Well, and they probably know that you're successful at what you do as well.
Yeah. They've seen the evolution of the various businesses and know that we've done interesting things for interesting organizations that hopefully have made a positive difference in people's lives and their own businesses and aspirations, right? So they've certainly paid witness to that.
And
Wonderful.
presumably they still call you if their laptop doesn't work.
Of course, I'm always
Yeah,
technical.
all of us are still the tech support in our old families. There's no doubt. Doesn't matter what stage you get to.
That's right.
All right. So you did mention they still don't know what you do for a living. Let's take the next minute and a half or two in oversimplifying and demystifying what you do for a living.
We're going to tell your parents. Your
general
parents are going to have to
population.
listen to this podcast to finally
Mom and
figure it
Dad.
out. After decades, Mr. and Mrs. Kirkwood, we are going to have him plainspokenly describe what it is he does for a living. Go.
If you had asked me 10 years ago, I'd give you a very different answer. And even though the aims and goals of building a company that solves connectivity challenges in one way or another might on the surface look the same, I think part of my learning experience, having not gone to college and kind of learned these lessons in the real world, I've seen what I do has really changed over time. 10 years ago, I would have told you to come up with the coolest widget, the coolest technical solution to the hardest problems, and have the neatest kind of network or be in the best data centers, kind of connect the best parts of the digital infrastructure ecosystem. But today I would tell you that what I do is build amazing teams. The biggest lesson that I've learned over all these years is that ultimately it's people that matter, right? It's not the technology. Yes, you have to solve technical challenges, but I spend most of my time thinking about how to enable a really high performing team to do great things and do it in a way where there's a fun culture that people want to be a part of and feel respected and valued and like they can contribute. And so that's, if you ask me today, what do I do? That's it. And it's both the teams in our businesses, but it's also helping others in that same respect and helping other organizations do the things that they need to do using our skill set. 10 years ago, I would have said I write config on routers, even though my job and role maybe hasn't changed. What I do certainly has.
I would have probably just said that I love to connect the world.
Right. But I'm not sure your parents would have any closer of an idea of what you did when you say that. I connect the world. Great. Got it. No problem.
Right.
How would the young Grant, the Grant that I met in 2000, whatever it was, have responded to that answer?
He
would
I
have
would
put
have-
Grant in the face. People, I could do it all myself.
That's right. I would say I'm Superman. I'm super smart. I'm going to go and do this. I don't need help. And I'm going to build the best possible network and I'm going to command and control it all. Right. Like it's just as we grow and age and some of us lose hair more than others, we learn that.
Thanks for that.
Oh, that was a low blow, Phil.
If it was a low blow, he'd see there's plenty of hair. All right. So I think it's an amazing evolution. And a lot of times we come on this program and it's like the technologies have evolved and it's that has informed why people do something else. Here, it seems like you have evolved and the underlying problem that you're trying to solve, it's probably on a different scale from a connectivity perspective. You were trying to solve, my God, we're going to bond two T1s together and we're going to get 3 megs out of it. It's going to be amazing. No one will ever see it coming, blazing fast. And now you're trying to solve problems on the terabit scale levels, and you've lived through that technical element, but that evolution from the technology being the core of it to the people being the core of it, what do you think informed? When was that kind of aha moment when you was it something that happened? Was it some like failure or success that showed, you know what, I'm better at doing this with other people? Was it some person that you interacted with that you were like, I get it now. I need to enable versus trying to do it all myself?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there was any one particular moment in time, but there's been a journey and fairly recently, to be direct about it. The 10 years ago version of myself would have wanted to be the smartest person in the room. And then I had the experience of being surrounded by really smart people and just helping facilitate, but step back and watch people smarter than me go and solve problems together. And that's when I realized the best thing I can do is help facilitate getting really smart, committed, competent, culturally aligned people together. And that's when the magic happens. We had an experience at Unitas where we got a huge customer, and it was a pretty old disaster recovery business. They had a big, expensive, very traditional network connecting up data centers. And we actually built a new backbone and lifted and shifted the whole thing onto the new network. It was the hugest deal, biggest commercial deal I've ever been involved with in my life, just huge money. And we fought really hard to get this customer. And then everybody said, yes, we were up against the biggest of the big, the AT&Ts and Verizons of the world, and little bitty Unitas won this great customer. But we had to build that network to go and bring the customer on board. And I'll never forget this. We had a kickoff meeting, big meeting that was going to be 50 people in the room, which was March of 2020. And got on the plane and I got 10 minutes after takeoff, all the messages, no, don't get on the plane. It's lockdown, COVID, everything else. And so landed, turned around, went back home. And we ended up bringing together a team from that company and from Unitas and some outsiders. We put a new team together and then did the hardest thing that certainly I've ever been part of in my life. And we pulled it off. We built that network and migrated the customer in 6 months. It was enormously complicated. And most of us never met each other along the way. It was probably 2 years later when we met for the first time. And it was like, we were kind of bonded in this, we were in the trenches, in the virtual trenches that time. And we really bonded, connected on a very personal level. Those people I consider lifelong friends at this stage. And that was recent. That was probably the final kind of nail in the coffin of old Grant, because I saw firsthand what a really talented team of people with respect and camaraderie and fellowship can do in just the hardest of circumstances. And that was transformative for me. There have been a lot of things before that, but just an incredible mentor that was my partner at Unitas and still a partner today. But yeah, just a lot of things along the way. I learned about transparency and directness and honesty and not trying to always have all the answers, and actually not having the answers can be hugely empowering, right? So I had a lot of benefit of some really capable people and people that I view as mentors along the way. But yeah, that experience during COVID, that was really something special.
Well, Reagan said that his entire strategy was to be in everyone's home. And COVID did establish that relationship in some capacity, that we were able to spend more quality time with people and potentially even get more personal because we didn't really have any other outlet, right? And or distraction for that matter. So yeah, that sort of makes sense. You talk about your business partner that was a mentor as well. What were some of the key takeaways? And it sounds like that you guys have been engaged for a decade or more potentially with the previous engagement at current capacity. What are some of the key takeaways that you've learned with being around him or her?
Yeah. So he really taught me the value of directness with people. I think as a young entrepreneur and leader, my tendency had been to kind of hide some of the challenges from the team and kind of always paint the optimistic picture and in the hopes that people don't get worried, right? Because people can become worried about their future if there's not a clear line to a straight line to the destination. But the path is never straight, right? It's always, there's ups and downs, lefts and rights. That's just part of the nature of it. And the biggest thing that I learned from him is just communicate to people. These are the facts, and you don't need to sugarcoat things. You don't need to hide the hard things so that people don't worry. And yeah, that means sometimes people will say, hey, what? I want the straight line path. This isn't that. And so it's not the right place for me. And the younger version of me was always worried about losing those people for those reasons. And what I've learned from Patrick is no, sometimes just being direct about these are the facts. We don't necessarily have all the answers, and it's going to be up, down, left, right on the path to where we're going to go. But if we have a team of people that respect each other and communicate effectively, right? And we have a good, strong culture, the strategy almost doesn't matter because culture is going to win. And those teams come together and they respect leaders more that are ones that are honest and transparent and upfront versus ones that have all the answers in all the directions. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned. Learned lots of tactical things as well, but it really is the appreciation for great culture and the magic that can create even in the most challenging of circumstances.
And I think just in listening to it, it sounds like the magic is not necessarily in the successes. The magic is in the challenges. The magic is in the failures, whether we call it first attempt in learning or any type of metaphor you can use. But that's where you build the grit. Easy times, what is that phrase, right? Tough times create strong people create easy times create weak people create hard times. And it's just this cycle that you kind of, I think it's human nature to want to paint the rosy picture. It's
Yeah,
human nature to not be vulnerable and admit that things aren't going great. And when you learn that authenticity to be vulnerable, you start attracting the types of people, it sounds like, from your case, and certainly I have a similar viewpoint, that get, if they can help you through the hard times, those are the people you want to celebrate the good times with.
that's right. Yeah. You don't learn from your successes. Maybe you can, but I think it's rare because inherently there's that confirmation bias. Well, okay, of course, I'm super smart. So it was because I'm super smart that we succeeded. And so it creates this kind of cycle of becoming the smart person.
You forget that it's like 90% luck.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You learn from the failures and the challenges, right? You're totally right. And vulnerability creates empathy, and empathy creates connection and strength in a team, right? So I think, yeah, it's hugely important to be vulnerable, especially as a leader of teams, right? Because that creates the space for your team. Say, if I don't know the answer, somebody else probably does, right? But if I pretend to have the answer, I'm not going to give that person a chance to share their opinion, right? And like I said, the younger me would have been on the opposite side of this coin. And I think what I've learned is that vulnerability, empathy, and openness really is transformative. And frankly, it's better for your own outlook on life too, right? Because you're not always trying to kind of hold these things in. It's almost freeing to just lay the hard things out there because then your blood pressure is lower as a result.
Well, that's exactly why therapy is such a booming business, right? People need to you be able to talk about their problems. Otherwise, they just you bottle it up, and it's not
It's not healthy. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit technology. So you got to experience data center and or the technology space early on in your life. You made the decision not to pursue astrophysics and or whatever else you were looking at, got involved into the technology space. Now, it's not necessarily the most easiest thing relatively speaking, as to some of the other trades potentially. How did you continue to learn? Was that by using Commodore VIC-64, just being a user of it and digging deeper into it and the curiosity why? Or were you engaged with other groups? Did you take any courses? Did you work with other people? Or you're like, all right, we're going to fix this parachute on the way down? What was your strategy?
That's a great question. When we kind of got into this space in the beginning, there was no Google. You couldn't Google how to program a Commodore 64.
We used to have a library.
Yeah, you know,
I'm
you're
not
right.
sure that is there a Commodore 64 like picture in an Encyclopedia Britannica somewhere? I guess it's possible.
They're in a museum, that's for sure. But there wasn't, yes. And yes, I spent a lot of time at the library, but the library certainly wasn't up to date to what was going on. And there was kind of that green screen thing in the back room that nobody really knew what it was there for. Right. And so I learned by breaking stuff. It's as simple as that, because there weren't really how-tos. There were some books, but they were typically out of date by the time they were printed. Things were moving pretty quick at that time. So everything I learned is because I was just breaking stuff. When I started my second company in Zima, this is when Phil and I met, I got this crazy idea that I was going to go build a communications network to connect data centers and help people with hosting companies get connected to great internet. That was BGP was total black magic at that time. And I didn't know the first thing about it. And so literally got some routers and threw them in data center and just started tinkering and breaking stuff. And at that point, it was mostly broken. So it wasn't a great platform to run a business from, but figured it out. And then met some smart people along the way who'd had a similar path. Very different today, because now if you want to know how to regrow garlic that you bought from the store, you go on and, pop up 10 different YouTube videos that tell you how to do that, but it just didn't exist at the time. And I've always been a tinkerer. I like playing with electronics and building interesting things in my garage. I've always enjoyed that. So I had kind of a natural aptitude for tinkering and breaking things. Some pretty expensive routers that lost their lives along the way, but yeah, no courses, nothing formal.
Well, I guess the best way to learn it's just like swimming. The best way to learn how to swim is to get in the water and do it.
Yeah, let's keep the metaphor going, right? The best way to learn how a parachute works is jump out of a plane and drill a hole.
Yeah. And I've certainly done a number of those. Jump off a cliff and build the wings on your way down. That's part of the entrepreneurial experience, right?
How does that evolve? What does that look like today? Obviously, let's call it more arm's length. I know you're not ever that arm's length. You're still like the plumber in your own community trying to fix water wells. But in general, from the technology perspective, do you find yourself still needing to like stay in the know? And obviously you're not breaking 400 gigabit networks now to understand what's happening in the networking world. So what do you do? How has that evolved in terms of how you stay in the know today, other than seeing me at conferences and taking selfies with me?
I do still have a rack of gear in my garage. And these days I spend most of my time on conference calls and in PowerPoint and Excel and Outlook, right? But no, I am an engineer at heart. I think technically that's just kind of who I am. It's in my DNA. And so when I don't know something or I don't have a solution to something, I go and try and figure it out. There's no replacing just going and jumping in the lab and having fun. But that is it is also fun for me to do that. I actually genuinely like trying to figure out how to make things do something new or different. That's a fun thing for me. But yeah, I guess that's how I say it now. But really, I would say much more so, I try to find people that are much smarter than me in whatever their kind of field or specialty is. Cause I think if, as much as I can go and tinker and duct tape something together that might work, it's probably not going to be something you would put in production. It's not something that's maybe as battle tested as it should be. And fortunately, I've got an incredible team of people now that I've been working with for many years that are just super, super gifted. And they can take some of my harebrained ideas and turn it into something that's, commercially viable.
10 years ago, Grant would have put it in production.
That's maturity.
That's right.
So one of the things that's very interesting, and I would like for you to expand on a bit, is you come from a very safe environment, right? Environment of educators, people that have gone to college, picked up their careers early on in their lives. You're walking away from it all. And not only that, deciding to be an entrepreneur. How did that play out? Of course, the end result is good, but could you share those trials and tribulations, the difficult times, telling your family that that's what I want to do all in. I'm taking the risk. I'm all in. This is it.
It was never a sit down and this is what I'm doing kind of conversation. It's just something that happened. And I feel so incredibly fortunate to have been in that moment in time and in the right place to really be a part of it. Was it right place, wrong time? Still trying to figure that out. But I no, it's in all seriousness, I feel just incredibly fortunate to have had the safe space and been encouraged to go and do this. But the flip side is there was a moment in both the telecommunications industry and the .com industry kind of imploded at the same time. And all of my business at that point, all of our biggest customers were these kind of interesting .com startups that had tons of venture capital behind them. And they all kind of imploded at the same time. And there was a moment there where I thought to myself, wow, Grant, you really made a huge mistake. The internet's over, the party's done, the lights are off, everybody's gone home. What are you going to do?
Mom and dad were probably practicing their "I told you so" speech in front of the mirror.
One of them was, but no, no, there was never an "I told you so," and that just speaks to the supportive nature of it. And yeah, there was a moment I thought I made a huge mistake, but the internet didn't end. It was not the end of the global digital infrastructure movement and transformation of the modern world into this kind of hyper-connected environment that continued on. And so at that point, I hadn't worked for anybody else. I started my first company in high school, and then second after the kind of .com implosion, and you pick yourself up and you carry on. I didn't know how to go get a job. I didn't have a resume, didn't really think that much of myself after having lived through that whole experience of watching everything implode. So that was a tough time. But as you said, it's all worked out. I feel like I got a crash course in the cyclical nature of the economy and kind of the human experience as a whole, right? Whereas the classmates that I went to high school with, they were recent graduates of college at that point. And so it was kind of an academic thing to look at what happened in the telecom and digital infrastructure space in the early 2000s. I was there in the midst of it. I was in the thick of it, right? So it was absolutely a crash course. Was it better than the education I could have gotten at a business school? I don't know, but certainly lived it.
Oh, how many of those people are working for you now?
Yeah, quite a few. Quite a few.
Yeah, I think the other thing it does is it probably speaks to the power of cat videos. The internet was never going to die because we could never possibly envision how powerful the cat video is going to be on the population.
And now it's goats and otters and mini cows.
Yeah.
Love the mini cows.
So throughout all of this, with the peaks and valleys, did you ever think that you're going to have a backup plan or a backup career? Was there anything like maybe you were a singer or something?
Yeah, I still am a singer. You don't want to hear it, but no, no, never had a backup plan. And I think part of being an entrepreneur is if you're creating a backup plan while you're starting a business, you're planting the seed of failure in your head. And I think that's a dangerous seed to plant, right? So, and I think the flip side of that is didn't go to college, didn't think that my resume was worth 2 shakes of salt. So therefore I have to create my own path, have to start my own business. That's just kind of how I've ticked, I guess.
Spoken like someone who has made every possible justification to their parents about why they weren't going to school. I can't have a backup plan. That's planting the seed of failure, Mom.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
I have a question on a different angle, and I know we're running tight on time, so we have to wrap it up in a bit. But you've seen where you have been in your career, and we followed similar trajectories. Clearly, yours has been more healthy for you than mine has for me, just judging from the side-by-side look at our faces. But you've seen technology evolve, front row seat, right? The internet from its very inception as a commercial vehicle. I guess it's a twofold question. Is anything about the way we use it today surprising to you in terms of technology? And then the second part of the question is, where do you see it all going? Everyone's freaking out about AI and all these crazy technology. I don't even know if you're really real. AI can now pinch itself and say, ow. So what the hell am I going to, how can I even tell it? So yeah, long-winded question, 2 parts. Go.
First of all, surprised all the time. All the time. The internet has created this medium by which people can try new things, right? If I think about what it took to start a pets.com in the early 2000s versus what it takes to start a business or a new idea today, not that it's necessarily easier, but there's this kind of toolbox that's readily available that you can go take parts from and try things and iterate very quickly. And so that creates this environment where all kinds of new things are going to come out. And yeah, a lot of them are going to be surprising. The flip side of that is so much of the innovative kind of firepower is now collected into a small number of very large entities, right? Not sure. And that's also been a surprise to me. I kind of remember the internet as the early 2000s, go throw up a website and try to create something. And today it feels very different. And that's been a surprise. I kind of, maybe my younger, more naive self thought the internet would always be what it was in 1999, but that's clearly not been the case. So yeah, I think, where's it going to go? Hard to say. There was a point in time where I was super proud to have kind of been along for the ride with the early adoption of the commercial internet, and really super proud of the kind of the interpersonal connections that enabled. These days, I think it also fuels division, which is a problem, huge problem for us just on a global level. That's also been a surprise. The kind of shift in the internet being this very carefully, well thought out, curated collection of data, and kind of more like that extension of a traditional library, to now repository of everything, good, bad, and ugly. I probably wouldn't have thought that would have been the case if you'd asked me in 1999, right? So where's it going to go? Yeah, AI is, I think, loads of opportunity, loads of uncertainty and questions about what does it mean for society as a whole. I think it can be transformative, but yeah, you don't know if my hair actually is just AI just landing on my head, right?
I just drove in a convertible with you, and I saw it didn't fly away. So
Okay.
I have empirical evidence that I've collected on my own that hair is real, and it doesn't make it any less painful.
You collected a sample and stuck it in a baggie.
I know everything.
He's going to use that to replant his.
Yeah. By the new chia seed it's going to be like a Grant quaff.
I have very good genes, as you can tell.
Knowing what you know today, Grant, and through your journey, what would you tell the younger Grant?
I would tell the younger Grant that the coolest widget, the best technology, that's really not everything, that it's people. And that's people, culture, team, that's everything. But at the end of it, whether it's in business or in something totally not to do with what we do for our jobs, that people really matter. People buy from people, people work with people. And I was so focused as a young person on all this cool new technology that was enabling things that were not possible or were not even thought of as possible just a few years before. I was very fixated on, transfixed maybe is the right word, right? I would go back and tell younger self, yeah, all that stuff is cool. And yes, absolutely play with all the cool new technology and toys. But remember that behind all that are people, and you can do great things with great people that actually matter, right? That's probably what I would have told my younger self. And also not to be quite so arrogant to my parents when I decided to not go to college.
Oh, there you go. That apology was overdue. Mom and Dad, there you have it. Grant, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. This has been spectacular. Loved your story. And thank you for sharing your passion about what you do.
You got a front seat to like the internet evolution, and I'm glad that I got a front seat on the evolution of Grant Kirkwood. So thank you so much. Glad to know you, man.
Thank you guys. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me on. I know it was long overdue, and glad we finally made it happen.
This has been great. Nothing lasts forever. Markets will come back, currencies will rebound, businesses will go on, and we will all move on. That could happen next week, next month, or next year. At Nomad Futurist, we're confident that those who prepare rather than panic will come out of this stronger. Thank you for joining us. This has been brought to you by Nomad Futurist. Check us online at nomadfuturist.org. And thank you for listening and subscribing, as well as your continued support.